the one thing the Big 12 has to be careful of here, if it does get too weird, Chris, and I think this is the one thing that I had to kind of figure out heading into the season, and I think a lot of fans haven't figured out, is the 4 byes are not for the Power 4 conferences. They're for the 4 highest rated conference champs. And you've got Arizona State looming. You got Colorado. We'll see where they rank. But if BYU doesn't win the Big 12, there's a real shot that Boise, we'll see about Army if they beat Notre Dame this week, could slide ahead of the Big 12 champion. And it's Boise grabbing that 4 spot. They're the only team that can probably do it. We'll see about Army. They get that 4 spot, and the Big 12 gets pushed down to, the seeding will get weird. They won't get pushed all the way down to the 12, but the seeding's going to get kind of
they might.
And they might, but you're probably going to have a Big 12 champion going on the road in the first weekend of games in the first round. That's not what you want to see if you're Brett Yormark.
No, if you go by the AP poll right now, Boise State's ahead of BYU. Boise State, potentially, on this upcoming CFP ranking show, could be the number 4 seed in that bracket, depending on what the committee does with BYU. It's very possible. Boise State is already there. And Boise State may not play UNLV again, who is a top 25 team, because Colorado State's undefeated in Mountain West play. So that could get a little weird. It's more likely than not that if BYU wins out, they would jump back over Boise State.
Yeah.
So keep an eye on that. And then, again, keep an eye on Army as well. If Army beats Notre Dame, then we're going to have a real conversation where it's not unreasonable that the Big 12 champion gets left out if they tear each other up and Army wins out and Boise wins out. Very real possibility.
Yeah. Let's get to what the playoff would look like, Chris. We have, we're sitting here. Chris, you're 134. We'll start there, and then we'll get into that AP poll scenario that you were referencing. What does your 134 playoff field look like?
This week we've got number 1 Oregon. They would play the winner of 8 versus 9 Alabama versus Ole Miss, which is an SEC game that did not happen this year. It'd be a heck of a pair of games there. Number 2 Texas versus number 7 Indiana or number 10 Georgia. Once again, Indiana hosting an SEC team potentially. But again, Indiana's got to play Ohio State. I've still got 3 seed BYU. They would play the winner of number 6 Penn State versus 11 Notre Dame. And then number 4 seed SMU would play the winner of Ohio State versus Boise State. And the first thing you think of when you see that settings is, wow, it's a pretty good path for Ohio State there. That is the 5 seed dream scenario that we've been worried about. I don't know about worried about, but thinking about ever since this started, which was, hey, the 5 seed might have a easier path. Some weeks we've done these rankings and it hasn't turned out that way, but this week it does. Yeah. And so
I think I saw a look-ahead line that Ohio State would be a 22-point favorite against Boise State. It'd probably be double digits against SMU. Listen, that might not bear itself out, but the reality is that's a pretty good matchup for you. And so you're doing that if you're going to be a double-digit favorite all the way to the semis. Again, if you're Ohio State, you lose in the Big Ten title game, but you win at home against Boise, you beat SMU, all of a sudden you're in the 14 playoff. and that's a good place to be if you're the Buckeyes. The AP poll, Chris, would look like this. Oregon at the number 1 seed. They would play the winner of Notre Dame, Alabama in the 8-9 game. Texas at number 2. They would play the winner of, like you had, Indiana at 7, Georgia at 10. Number 3, Miami, the ACC champion, would play Penn State the winner of Penn State, Ole Miss. Ole Miss would have to go to Happy Valley from the SIP to, I don't know, they don't really have a cool nickname outside of Happy Valley, but it'd be cold. They'd have to get the bench warmers out. I know that for sure. And Boise would get the bye and be the 4 seed at number 12, and they would play the winner of Ohio State and BYU. And again, Ohio State in that game, that's basically just kind of a reverse. I think Ohio State would probably be double-digit favorite in that game against BYU, especially in Columbus. So we'll see. A lot of interesting stuff could possibly shake out here, and we're gonna Ohio State is going to be a really big game for what this looks like and what this picture looks like and how Indiana is treated. I wrote in Bubble Watch, there's 6 teams in the SEC that are currently with legitimate bubble cases for at-large bids, regardless of what happens in Atlanta. None of the teams, there's no true elimination game left. The only game between those 6 teams is Texas and Texas A&M. And if Texas A&M wins that game, which it'll probably be close to a coin flip line, I'm guessing, Texas is probably still in the field. Texas A&M might play its way back
into
the field. It's a yes, Chris. I agree. The resume is not good. The resume is not good, but the committee's not going to drop. The committee's not going to drop on like 9 spots for losing on the road to a top 15 team. Texas' resume is not good. They have no top 25 wins. They have the weakest resume, but they have 1 loss, and because of that, they're ahead of every other team in the SEC, which, if you want to complain about that, I'm not going to stand in your way. I think it's a little ridiculous.
And I'm someone who has Texas number 3 as well, because we had them there, and then you didn't really have a reason to drop them, and then all the teams that could leap over them have 2 losses, and it gets really, really hard, and I'm having trouble with this myself. I have Notre Dame down at number 10 right now, but you could make the case they should be right there with Texas, or right there with Penn State. Like, you can. Notre Dame Army, I think, is going to impact my Notre Dame ranking. If they beat Army, I'm going to leap them over a lot of those SEC teams probably. But like, when Miami lost, I dropped them 10 spots. The committee dropped them probably not as far as they should have, because they didn't have any good wins to go on top of that. And now some of their wins aren't even as good. Like, if Texas finishes 10-2 with losses to Georgia and Texas A&M, and their wins are Michigan, Arkansas, like
Oklahoma, Chris. Oklahoma could go to a bowl game, Chris.
There's nothing there. There's nothing there. And if you were to compare
at that point, though, if you compare the eye test.
But if you compare a 2-loss Texas to a 2-loss Ole Miss, a 2-loss Alabama, a 2-loss Georgia, like, all 3 of those teams have better wins and a better resume. That's why I think there is a real chance Texas could plummet if they don't beat Texas A&M.
This is why people get frustrated with the committee, because they have all these metrics, Chris. You have, what is that team's record? How many top 25 teams has that team played? What is their strength of schedule? Do they use the strength of record, or did ESPN just start talking about that? I forget where the strength of record came up.
I don't remember seeing strength of record in the mock committee.
The strength of record is basically a made-up formula that says it's like it's like baseball VORP, basically. It's like, what would the average team do against your schedule, essentially? So there's all these metrics that they have, and the committee kind of uses them to explain.
Well, they don't use that. They don't use it. They also don't use game control.
But then there's the eye test that fits into this as well, and I think that's where Texas is strong. As you watch Texas, you're like, that's a pretty good team. They got good pieces.
Did you see that? Did you watch that Arkansas game?
I watched it, but it's like
it's a one-score game in the fourth quarter there.
At the end of the day, though, the only thing that you watch Texas and you kind of make you go, was going to or that game against Georgia. So I think at the end of the day, like, I get the complaints, I get all that, but Texas is where it is. It's not going to drop that far for a loss to Texas A&M. So I get where the committee's at, and the week-to-week frustrates them generally. Week-to-week frustrates people, but generally they do a pretty good job, I think. But we'll see. I think that the inconsistent usage of the metrics that they have, I think, is the biggest reason why people just generally don't like the committee, despite the fact that they do a decent job.
I think it's the lack of transparency. You have one person come out, your chair, and they talk and they give nothing answers. By the way, Ward Manuel, he's doing a really, really good job of saying nothing on these calls and to ESPN. He's saying nothing. And a reminder, like, in these committees, not everybody agrees. They don't all think, yes, this team should be this and this is why. This team should be this and this is why. You do anonymous votes, and then those are tabulated, and it creates the ranking. So wait,
what about the investigative story we were going to do about the anti-Georgia cabal within the committee? Are we not doing that anymore? Are we not?
Kirby's
pretty upset about that button.
I like the idea that because the committee said something about Georgia's offense, that's why Georgia's offense played better against Tennessee. Oh, that's all it took. Oh, you could have done that all the time. You needed the motivation from the committee. Why didn't you think to do that before? It is impossible. This first year of the 12-team playoff, it is harder to rank these teams than I think we imagined coming in. It has turned out to be a lot harder because of the depth of the SEC and the lack of real dominant teams in the SEC. Didn't expect to have all these 2-loss teams. Maybe we should have, because the conference is bigger and you're not playing everybody, so you get these weird results. But this is a really hard, probably impossible situation the committee has right now. And people are going to be mad, and there's always something to be mad about. There's no right answer here. That's unfortunately the reality. We do have a couple of weeks left. It's possible it could become clearer when we get there. But at this point, I mean, as someone who ranks teams myself, you know, you could argue with my rankings and I'd be like, yeah, you know what? You got a point. But it's got to be somebody. At some point, you got to pick somebody.